Hey everyone, welcome back to Electoral Dysfunction, the show where comedians and experts debate the news of the week from the safety of their quarantine. This is our 15th show. I am your host, Tom Brennan, and I am very proud to have you with us. But as we come on the air this morning, we have some breaking news out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. We throw it now to our very own Amanda Nicastro, who is on the scene. Amanda, welcome to the show. Boy, that was some Trump rally last night, huh? I mean, I cannot believe that he went on TV and said,
slow down COVID testing
in front of a crowd like that. I mean, it's crazy, huh?
No, Tom, let's not do this, okay?
Not do what?
The whole, we pretend this wasn't filmed the night before the rally. Let's not do that, okay? Let's just not do that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, schedule-wise, we weren't able to record the show until after the rally. It's before the rally, but are you okay?
No, I'm not okay. Here we are at another Trump rally, okay, in the middle of a friggin' pandemic, nonetheless, and we're in Tulsa, and it's the day after Juneteenth. I cannot.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty awful. And on the plus side, he, at least he moved it off Juneteenth, huh?
Oh, a day, Tom. He moved it a day, okay? He doesn't give a shit about anybody. All he cares about is deposit.
That's a good point. You may be right. It was literally the least he could do. So I guess it will be a pretty bad rally, though. He'll probably say something shocking and...
No, Tom, he's not going to say something shocking. No, he's going to say something horrible and awful and offensive like he always does. Literally, the only thing that he could say at this point that would shock me would be, oh, no, sorry, Trump bad, Pence bad, we resign. I'm so sorry. And the only reason that I looked weird walking down the ramp at West Point was because I pooped my pants. Trump made oopsie. That's literally the only thing that would surprise me at this point.
That would surprise me too. Well, Amanda Nicastro, you're right. It's a pretty dark time for all of us, but hey, here's to 15 shows, huh? 15 electoral dysfunctions.
15 shows!
Jeez. All right. Ned Thorne, for the 15th time, let's star wipe us over to the panel. All right. Join me in welcoming our 15th panel, huh? 15 panels. We did it. This is a great panel. We're really excited to have some of our favorite people with us. First up, she is one of the co-hosts of the podcast DTF. Find them on anchor.fm/DTF. Is it anchor.fm/DTF or DTF pod?
DTF show.
DTF show, anchor.fm/DTF show. PhD in human sexuality and burlesque performer, Dr. Timmerie Schmidt. Hey, Timmerie, how are you?
Hello. I'm here with my good friends. So, we're having a party.
Joker again.
Having some drinks,
It's good to see him, and they've earned it. Next up, another wonderful resume for this panelist, veteran of both The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and the United States Marine Corps, our own favorite friend, Justine Davey. Hey, Justine, how are you?
Doing very well. Hello. I have walked about 1,500 steps today.
Very nice. I'm at 6,000, so boom.
Whoa.
Yeah, you got to be anxious all the time. That's my secret.
It works.
Very excited to have this next person with us, co-host of DTF with Dr. Timmerie, and you can find his album Black Gentrifier on DarylCharles.bandcamp. Daryl Charles. Hey, Daryl, how are you?
Hello. Hi.
Welcome.
I have probably less than 100 steps at this point.
Well, it's if ever there's a time to stay home, it's now. So, next up on the panel, you saw her just moments ago down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and now magically she's back here in the Bronx. Our own correspondent and also host of Lifestyles of the Quarantine and Restless over on the Frigid Network, Amanda Nicastro. Hey, Amanda, how are you?
Hello!
Well done getting here in time. Nice work.
Hey.
And editorial columnist for the New York Daily News and the voice of New York City, Robert George. Hey, Robert, how are you?
I'm doing all right. To see 2,400 steps and counting. So doing all right today. So excellent. Thank you.
Good job. It seems like I'm the only one on this call who, when he's anxious, just walks up and down the stairs of his building like a crazy person.
God, do you ever?
But
I've only got 145 steps today.
I can only
look at us.
assume when we're up for a lease again that like they're gonna be like, we just have one question. Here's the security camera footage for 4 months in 2020 where you just kept walking up and down the stairs. Is everything okay? And I'll have to be like, it was the quarantine, and just hope. So
It was 2020.
yep, it was 2020. I had a bad case of 2020. So as we speak, we mentioned this a little bit at the top. We are filming this on Saturday afternoon. So Trump's rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma has not happened yet. I think it's fair to predict that probably it won't be, like best case scenario, it's just going to be bad. But as we come on the air right before we started recording, 6 members of his campaign staff who dealt with advance work and specifically dealt with advance work for the Tulsa, Oklahoma rally tested positive for COVID-19. So it's possible by the time we play this that there might not even be a Trump campaign anymore. Stole that joke from Robert George right before the show, and I'd do it again. But that happened, and then on top of it, the rally itself, masks will be handed out, but they are not mandatory. Although everyone who attended this rally had to agree to a waiver in advance that they would not hold the Trump campaign legally responsible if they contract COVID-19. This will be the largest, as I understand, largest indoor event since the COVID-19 pandemic has broken out. It is certainly since it hit nationwide status, at least. It's the largest indoor event. It's it's either the BOK Center or the Bach Center. I couldn't get a clarification.
I think it's the Bach Center.
The Bach Center in Oklahoma. It's 19,000 seats. They expect every single one of them to be filled. There was a line starting as early as last weekend for this. How do we feel? What do we think? Think things are going to go good tonight? Think things are going to be nice and sane and polite, or we'll talk about how COVID is a real challenge and we all need to come together?
I think the thing that really bothers me is that news can only do so much. The CDC can only do so much. And you still have people who are saying that, like, I will not live in fear. If it's God's will that I get coronavirus, then that is the will of the Almighty. Or, I'm healthy, so I'm not going to wear a mask. And it's like, even if you are religious and, whatever you feel, it's like, you can still help. It's like, did you wear a seatbelt? Are you adhering to stop signs? So I understand, like, just the idea of just kind of blindly going into something because it makes you comfortable and saying, like, well, if it happens, it happens. And it's like, well, you could help. You could do at least a couple of the things. Like, all the signs are there. And I think that's what's so frustrating is that the numbers are out that we're seeing record high cases from Florida and all these states that weren't hotspots before. And so all the evidence is there. And then in a time when you have the first, presidential rally since quarantine where tens of thousands of people are attending, it's like you can't do the bare minimum. And I wonder, why couldn't they move it outside? There were all these questions leading up to it, aside from the June 19th aspect that is just wildly frustrating.
I think the moving outside is a good question because there's a precedent, there's a precedent with the protests that we're seeing that, like, outdoor events, there's ways that you can have mass gatherings and be safer. Indoors, that's the most important one. This is going to be indoors. There's going to be a lot of chanting. There's going to be a lot of recirculation, if we will, of everything in the room. That's an added danger that people aren't commenting on as much.
That's what, and Justine made a great point. This comes at a time where the former hotspot, New York, where many of us are from, the infection rates, hospitalization, everything is on the downward slope and almost hitting flatline. Whereas that's not the case in Florida or Arizona, and in fact, in terms of per capita, Tulsa just by itself has seen a significant spike. You're seeing red state governors like in Texas and also the governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey. Previously, they had sort of downplayed the whole idea of masks, and now they're saying, the Tusi in Arizona said that I'm going to allow localities to impose mask regulations if they want to. And Greg Abbott allowed even though he had previously said towns couldn't do it by themselves. He then said, "Oh well, I actually left an out for judges making them do it." Wink, wink, wink. And now the judges are doing it.
Did he actually say wink, wink, wink?
That was a slight addition on my.
All right, fair enough.
But he was making this kind of cutesy thing, saying, "Well, my executive order always had a judicial out, and it's not my fault that only now are you guys figuring this out." I mean, it was just really kind of really kind of odd. So we are at a point where red state governors are having to face reality, and that at least something as simple as putting on a mask does not have to spark a culture war. But nonetheless, there we are.
That's the interesting thing, is it's become a health thing that's politicized, right? And one of the things that I have gathered as a researcher in health stuff, mostly when I'm reading about this kind of stuff, it's in the context of STIs. So how do we exist in the world as adult people and have full lives and reduce risk, like so from harm reduction? But the thing that has happened here is that it's politicized. And when we want to have any sort of collective change where a bunch of people are engaging in a different behavior, the biggest factor is actually not education. And we can't even necessarily motivate people, like money, stuff like that isn't going to be nearly as effective as just normalizing the idea that people who are like me engage in this behavior. And we see that when it comes to like getting people to recycle, getting people to wear condoms, stuff like that, that the biggest thing is like identifying with a group. And so in this particular case, because it's become a political thing where there's this whole group of people who are like, this isn't real, or it's being exaggerated because they're trying to take down Trump, they're actively like participating in the spreading of a pandemic because, like, I mean, facts don't change people's minds. Like, look at climate change.
Almost never.
So it's just unfortunate that it became a political thing, because like, it just didn't have to be.
Facts are on like a 200-year losing streak across the globe.
But I think
go ahead, Daryl.
I think it goes back to I think it was shortly after he was elected, people on the internet were saying, like, you just can't teach empathy. Like, I can't convince you to care about other people. So if you don't care, you don't care. And that's kind of where I'm stuck with it. So I'm like, yeah, let all these people die, or let all these people catch the disease if they want to. But, you know, then that comes with a lot more problems. But yeah, you can't, and it's a great point to bring up, making the in-group be the group that says no to the masks and no to science, which is something that we've seen now for years at this point. Yeah, I do think that's a great argument to show that, yeah, they are actively participating in making this disease worse and have been doing it since what, December?
That's, I think, and we were talking about this right before the show, like an important thing to note, you know, exactly as you said, like my immediate reaction was like, ugh, it's terrible, but at least it's just going to be his supporters. But, you know, as we've learned, it takes a few weeks for, you know, symptoms, in many cases, for symptoms to manifest. Next weekend's July 4th. All of the people from, you know, many of the people in Tulsa, you know, at this rally aren't necessarily from Tulsa. They're going to spread out. They're going to see their families. Their families are going to spread out. I'm very anxious about the next few weeks. By the way, Robert, I was double checking a fact, and Tulsa County, Oklahoma yesterday saw their largest one-day spike in COVID-19 cases just on Friday, June 19th.
Undefeated, baby.
So
Who has reported that the U.S. has like the worst COVID cases in the world? Yeah, we're number one. We're number one.
We're 25% of 25% of the world's COVID deaths right here in America.
We're not number one in education.
Oh.
Oh, well.
Now, who needs education when you're wheezing, huh?
Yeah.
Come on now.
A lot of jobs, and there's more jobs in a pandemic than there are in education, right?
Uh-huh.
That's the way you look at it. But let's talk then, I'd say, about like the rally itself. We talked about it a little bit last week, but I want to take a moment to talk about the specifics of why, you know, like the question is why Tulsa, right? And of course, you know, it seems like a layup of an answer, but just to make sure we set the stage, you know, we're talking about a state that Donald Trump will probably win fairly handily this fall. And it's not, you know, also as like a lot of cities in your red states tend to be bluer. Tulsa, not necessarily so. Like it's you know, not like Robert before mentioned how governors in Texas and in Arizona are giving localities power to enforce mask mandates. Important thing to note, you know, the part of me that says like that as a heart is like, aha, finally they had a heart. But then the political person in my mind said most of the localities with the largest populations tend to be run by Democrats, and this way a governor can sort of have a Republican governor I could see having their cake and eating it too. Be like, all right, I allowed them to enforce a mask ban to reduce the spread, and I can pin this government overreach on the Democrats. And we'll do it because we'll walk into any trap if we think it'll help. But why Tulsa? You know, and particularly there is definitely not just Tulsa for you know, for the symbolism of the massacre in 1921, and then on top of it, initially was going to be on June 19th, but then moved one day. What do we think? I guess I'll start there. Why do we think he moved it a day? Because I'm curious about what led to the decision making movie day. Because this is the kind of thing that it seems like 4 years of experience has taught me. This is the kind of, even that was the kind of thing that I thought he'd dig in on. And I looked it up, and TV ratings on Saturday are as bad as they are on Friday. So that the selfish part of him that came into play was not, into play. He would have moved it to Sunday if it was a TV ratings thing. So what do we think got him to move it one day?
I'm assuming that it was a combination of somebody within the White House and on the campaign who just said this is completely unsustainable. We've already had, at that point, there had already been at least 2 weeks or so of bad stories coming out of the Lafayette Park incident, and the protests and the focus on the police and everything else, and that dual of what was seen as a dual offense to the Black community of the rally both being on Juneteenth and in Tulsa. That particular combination, I didn't realize that was just unsustainable, and so he said, okay, we'll just move it a day. So that's just my interpretation of what was going on there.
Plus, it could have been planned in that he was like, okay, I'm going to put it on Juneteenth because nobody knows what this holiday is about. And then I'm going to look like the good guy because I'm going to move it to the Saturday and be like, hey, I made Juneteenth famous. All of you guys didn't know about it. You're welcome. You're welcome for my service.
His favorite tell, the best tell with Donald Trump is whenever he says, nobody knew X. Which is his way of saying, I just found out.
Yeah, I just learned X.
Yeah, I mean, he said that in 2017. Hardly anybody knew that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. Wait, what? Hello?
Yeah.
Come on!
I keep waiting. I was in the height of the crisis. I was really hoping he'd say, "Who knew that so many people used toilet paper?" So that we could be like, "Oh boy." Sorry, Robert, I interrupted you.
No, but it's like, you can mock the subtitle of the or the brand name of the Republican Party, Party of Lincoln. I mean, you can mock that if you want, but it's been around for a while. So you kind of think that he would have realized that, but who knows? Maybe he thought it meant the Party of Lincoln, Nebraska. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe he did. Good question. Other thoughts?
He must have never heard of the Lincoln Log Cabin Republicans.
Okay,
yeah. Many of you.
Nice
work.
I'm not gonna
Charles, everybody.
All
right. But other thoughts, other feelings and thoughts. I'm just curious to make sure everyone on the panel gets a few moments to talk about, about him picking Tulsa, Oklahoma, and particularly like it's. Sorry, go ahead, Daryl.
I mean, to quote another thing that the internet has told me, the cruelty is the point, right? Like, he tried to ban protections on trans folk on the anniversary of the Pulse nightclub massacre during Pride Month. He pulled back. I can't remember what he did to black people in the month of February, but he does that shit. That's what he does, like consistently. I will give credit to Stephen Miller. Yes, he's a ghoul, but this dude has a good calendar. He knows exactly when to do the worst thing.
Right.
And, you know, I think it's very fun to say that these people are yahoos and kooks and to say that they're crazy and they don't know what they're doing. But, I mean, history will show you they are very good at picking the days to inflict the most harm, like just like psychologically, just to stick the dagger in that much further. So picking it to be at Tulsa, picking it to be on June 19th was definitely, to me, a plan by someone. I don't think it was the president, but I do think it was someone who has a lot of say in where this person goes and what they say and do. And that's how they roll. I think it's like at this point, it's nice that they're consistent.
Amanda, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I don't think the president is a particularly smart person in any sense of the word, but like, let's just stop thinking that he is not aware of what he's doing. Like, you don't have to know a shit ton of stuff to be a calculating evil person. Like, he agrees probably with everything that people bring him, and he's like, yeah, that makes sense, you know, just piggybacking on what Daryl said. Like, just don't let that be an excuse anymore. I am 100% of the belief that he is aware of what he does, how cruel it is, and the reasons why he's doing it. Like, don't give him any more excuses. Dumb or not, knowing things is not an excuse at this point for him.
I think we talked about this last week. At a minimum, you know, even if he didn't know that Juneteenth was a important day, you know, he knew about it for at least, I think, 8 hours or so between when it was brought up to him on a Fox News interview and later that night when he changed the date. Justine, I'm sorry, were you about to?
I was just saying that, like, and it really drums up his base, right? Because if his base is against these values, whether it be, you know, anti-racism or anti-LGBTQ, like, it's just like, oh man, you know, why are they making us do it? They're pushing us around. And so I think it just drives more into that far right base where they feel like they're being pushed around. So then they're more motivated and more incentivized to be that much harder in their support. So it is very strategic in a lot of ways. And I think that that was a very good point to make, Daryl.
I think it was a good point to make too, Justine, that like it's to exacerbate the naysayers, right? To make so if you don't feed the trolls, they die. But like, so you pick a very incendiary point to make everybody and then that keeps it going.
And I think
someone with a wheelbarrow and like inflammatory statements like, gotta go feed the trolls. Here you go, trolls.
Yep.
I think it's interesting how much of the stuff has become about like symbolism, because I mean, this is sort of changing topic, but like how much stuff where we're like, whether Juneteenth is officially recognized as a holiday and whether or not we take down these statues and whether or not we take this flag off of this other flag and things like that. And those things are the things that people can really dig into, because it's so much easier to pull a Columbus statue down and then change its location on the Google map than it is to like change the system of policing or to install some legislation where we have proper funding for the rest of the world besides policing and stuff like that. So it's like we latch onto this stuff where we like, I can do something about this in the next 2 weeks. And so that's where we really are glomming on.
And I mean, I think it's a lot of. Go ahead.
No, just that. No, Terry, that's a great point, and that is actually one of my concerns about the broader protests movement that's going on. I mean, we're coming up on. It's amazing if you think about it. We're coming up on about a month since George Floyd was killed, and a lot has happened. I mean, in New York passed some of these significant police reforms, including opening up old disciplinary records and things like that. And you're at least having some discussion going on at the federal level as well. But ultimately, what will winning really look like? And I don't think it's, I personally don't think it's tearing down every statue of every one of our, figures in history that that may have been a slave owner at the founding. I mean, I think you start to need to make some tough calls. Meanwhile, if you're taking the energy from that and then putting it into longer term policy making and stuff like that, which is a whole lot harder and is a whole lot less satisfying, but it's ultimately what you really need to build the society.
Look, if we swap James Gandolfini for that Chris Columbus statue in Columbus Circle, I'll say progress. Justine, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the statue debate's very fascinating to me, and I think like there's a lot of different ways you can look at this, right? So there's the legal ways that governors, mayors, whoever are going about to try to quell the situation, and then you have protesters taking down Confederate statues, controversial statues, and a lot of it is because it's very difficult to make a change, and also to just have these historical reckonings to make sense of like the falsehoods that these statues stand for, right? So it's like, you're not going to learn that those statues are controversial in school because it's not taught that way. And these statues and, it's the idea of like this lost cause idea that like we are trying to, or those statues help nobilize the idea of what the Confederates were fighting for during that time. Whereas, they were created decades after the end of the Civil War, and it's not hard to realize the way that we have sort of honored Confederate soldiers in different ways, naming highways after them and military bases after them. When if you look at it, like one of the most senior Confederate generals, he was also like the first Grand Wizard of the KKK right afterwards, but then the statues that have been created in his namesake came late 19th century, things like that, and had nothing to do with like the end of the Civil War. And if you think about it, it's not like there aren't statues that honor Nazism in Germany. So I know that's like opens up a whole other thing, but I think like you can understand the frustration with the statue thing, and also there are legal ways to go through taking down a statue, and that has been sought out as an avenue. But in the process of that, many states have tightened up those laws that creates, whether you can take down a war memorial or who actually is in that power versus, a mayor versus a governor, which is, things that we are seeing with COVID as well. So it's there's just so many facets to that discussion that I think a lot of it has to do with, not wanting to have a false sense of your own history, and the fact that a lot of it is going to come from your own efforts, because the traditional ways of learning these things aren't in place for you to learn them.
I want to add one quick thing before you get to that, Robert, but just to the point you made about UNC statues to Nazism in Germany. In fact, a colleague of mine, Sebastian Gerner, who runs TKO Comics, check him out, they're great books. He grew up in Germany, and I asked him once how they learned, like, how did you learn about World War II? And he said, in his school at least, he didn't necessarily say this was for every school, but in his school, first day in history class, they played film of Allied soldiers liberating concentration camps. And then the whole thing was, how did we let this happen to our country? How did we let our country become the sort of the thought everyone goes to in terms of evil in the world? And then they go back to sort of the foundings of Germany and work their way up to that point and learn about every, along the way, the various, like, as he put, like, smaller, moments that you might not think mattered at that, like, in that point of history, but that eventually added up towards a country that was susceptible to that kind of leadership. And it was very interesting to me. Robert, go ahead.
Great point. My concern, I don't have any problem with having every single Confederate statue, being taken down tomorrow, whether it's a governor taking it down or whether it's the angry mob taking it down. My concern is, and we're seeing this in a couple of places, is that you hate to use that phrase slippery slope, but you do end up with a slippery slope of, okay, Confederate statues, there's a pretty broad consensus that they should not be honored. Then it becomes, well, Confederate statues, slaveholder statues, or slave owner. That's when it becomes a gray area, because you've got a number the founders, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and so forth, who did own slaves. Though, unlike the Confederates, they either owned slaves or fought for slavery, and that was the whole idea. Versus some of the founders who tried to create a country that was based on liberty, but they also had the slaves. So it's a more complicated issue. And then again, because some of these things are not taught in the schools, you get people who you got. This happened either Thursday or Friday night in San Francisco. A statue of Ulysses S. Grant, who kicked the ass of the Confederacy. His statue got yanked down as well because for whatever reason. So
all the other good statues have been taken down.
When
a good guy with a statue.
You want to get in on that statue tearing down, but it's too late. There's still one there.
You start getting caught up in the passions of the moment. You start getting into this mode of let's throw out all of history and start brand new, which doesn't actually work out too well.
Hold on. No one's trying to throw away history. No one is trying to throw away history. A statue is not history. It's a monument to something. So if you want to get rid of it or put it somewhere else. I think a lot of the problems that people have with the statues are not that they exist. It's that they are state-sponsored epitaphs to terrible things that have happened. So put them in a museum, put them in a school, keep them on your private property. But when you put it in front of a courthouse and it stands as a symbol of what happens in that courthouse, if I want to burn that down or mark it up or do something, that's a reflection on the laws surrounding it. There's no, I don't, yeah.
No,
Daryl,
Daryl, I was making I'm sorry, just let me underscore the point again. I'm making a very strong distinction between, say, the Confederate statues and those other statues that are either more complicated than the Confederate ones, or they just happen to be of somebody who's of a similar era, but there's no reason to tear down, say, a Ulysses S. Grant statue. That's what I was saying.
Well, let's talk.
Sorry, Tom. I had this thought the other day. I was an AP U.S. history student. I could have handled all of these nuanced arguments. My AP U.S. history teacher literally taught us that the Civil War was about states' rights and that the Emancipation Proclamation was simply a tool of war. It had nothing to do with anybody's feelings on abolition. I believed that for a hot second of my life, and I felt like smart about it. Like, oh, I didn't know that. I have insider knowledge. And I thought the other day, had social media existed when I was in high school the way it does now, and I saw videos of people tearing down statues, even statues of Ulysses S. Grant, because like, didn't he like burn a bunch of shit and kill a bunch of people? Like, our history.
He's a general, Amanda.
If I saw this, then I would go look up stuff and form my own thoughts, and I wouldn't just have been regurgitating what my white male Southern AP US history teacher was teaching me and thinking that I was a good person for it. And I think that even addressing some of these less controversial but still complicated figures does a lot for how we view history, because most of our history is viewed through the lens of conquering white cis males.
I think let's unpack quickly. And I was going to go to statues later, but let's talk about it now. But I think like there's two separate arguments, which I think Robert and Timmery both brought up very rightly, which is like, let's not let the tearing down the statues be like, did it, like nothing else has changed. At the same time, I'll say for myself, like and I say this as someone who's like a fan of the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, these places, and like visiting them, and I find them interesting and get a lot out of them. I don't like the idea of statues of any elected leader. Like, I think it invites the wrong kind of people to government. Stop and imagine a world where there's going to be a statue of Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer someday. like that's just weird. And I think like what I always, imagine if Ben Franklin has had an ego. So if you brought him to the future, you'd be like, great, love all these statues. I think that one with me in a tunic's weird, but whatever. But I can't imagine that like a lot of, like you read some of the founding fathers and their thoughts on kings and monarchies and the power of some people. Like there's a sentiment in there itself that's like the statues are not great, as Zoff said, a monument's built easier to build than a movement. And I do think like the thing that's kind of, I think a thought I had watching all this, like if nothing else, if my tax dollars are spent on a statue being somewhere and I don't want a statue there, like I'd be like, yeah, let's get rid of this. There's a Captain America statue in Prospect Park, which is kind of weird because it's designed based off the movie costumes. I'm like, on the one hand, I love Captain America. On the other hand, like this is just a monument to Walt Disney Entertainment, a monument to get Disney Plus in the middle of my public park. Like that's.
Can you imagine if we had Disney Plus in the parks? Oh my goodness. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, then we could go outside again.
Right?
Oh man, and this is how it happens. This is how the cycle begins.
I got that reference.
Yeah, nice work. Good job.
I have like two thoughts on what you're saying right there. And one of the things is that we can have any number of different reactions to the Columbus and to, Robert E. Lee and those sort of things. There's a lot of different ways we can approach that. And I think one of the issues that I have is not only that they exist, that those are the folks who are aggrandized, but there isn't representation of like people who do other types of good. Like, let's say I did think that what they did was good, right? Like, so where are the statues to like the people who came up with a vaccine, or the people who like spent a long time building schools, or like, it's the stuff like that. It's like what we put statues up of is like war. And like, I'm so disappointed all the time that we aren't having the Harriet Tubman 20, because our money sucks so bad on every level. Like, it's difficult for blind people because they're all the same size, and it's ugly money anyway. Like, have you ever seen Canadian money? You're just like, we suck so much in comparison. And we had this like awesome thing that was going to happen, and the Trump administration is like, again, with symbols and being mean, they're like, nope, you can't have anything nice. And
I think that was in February, right? That they like officially said hell no to it.
I don't know.
Yeah, it was not that long ago. They were just like,
Yeah.
It's not going to happen during this administration. And it's just like, not only do these things suck that we're like rewarding and aggrandizing, but we don't get to have anything nice. Like, nobody that people can agree on was like, that was cool.
Robert, whatever you're saying is not coming up. So pause and then start over.
Harriet Tubman, a black Republican woman who loved guns. It was so easy for the Trump people, and they just let it go. They just let it go.
Yep.
This is the only time I hate. I am like, identity politics are terrible. Actually, all the time I say that. But yeah. Ugh.
Oh man, very nice. So let's talk.
Wait,
sorry.
sorry.
Go, yeah.
What you were saying, Tom, about Germany and how they teach war. It's like, yeah, to go off of Timmery's point, where she was saying, like, why do we have these things up? Like, why don't we teach about, we as a culture aggrandize war, and it's in our media, and it's in all this different stuff, where we are just a war-seeking nation. Like, we, Team America, world police. It would be great if we could, go team. But it would be great if we could teach war as like from the standpoint of where did diplomacy fail? And like, why did we decide to disturb peace?
Yeah.
I feel like at that point, though, then you are asking all of us to revisit our idea of American exceptionalism, which that's going to be a hard. I mean, I think we should. That's a hard mountain to climb for a lot of people. So.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, you're exactly right, and I think the way we teach World War II in America is is right on that track, which is like, it's, it is a war where like we couldn't not get involved at a certain point. But I think a thing that I always enjoyed learning about, learning about the Cuban Missile Crisis, just because like ultimately that is a moment in history where like all of the effort was put into not going to war, and like that is a moment that like, and I think like the JFK gets a lot of undue credit just because he was a good-looking president who spoke well, but like that's a moment that we should teach more of. Like, the guy did everything in his power to stop war from happening. Mm-hmm. And I will say, like, likewise, like my many issues with Ronald Reagan, also like we don't teach enough of the Cold War that he did genuinely want to avoid actual armed conflict. We talk about everything else in that era. We don't talk about how he tried to avoid. Yeah.
We known we could win. Would America, in its American exceptionalism, tried not to enter war?
Hell yeah, we would have. If it were just about non-nuclear missiles, we'd be all over it. Robert, are you still there, or were you frozen out on this end? Okay, I couldn't tell if you were thinking or if you were holding position.
I just there was, because we live in ugly Trump world. There was even as we're talking, there's breaking news on a topic that we're about to go into.
Let's
so
break it. Break the news, and we'll go into it.
At the urging of Attorney General Bill Barr, Donald Trump has fired U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman, who yesterday had refused to resign after Barr said that he was stepping down. So we basically have a nice little mini constitutional crisis on our hands.
Just
so
a little one.
Just a little one.
So let's talk about that real quick, because as we said before, rough week for the president of Law and Order when it came to the law. The law smacked him around a little bit this week. And last, Friday night, Justice Department announced that U.S. Attorney for the Southern District Jeff Berman would be stepping down. About an hour later, Berman announced from the official government Twitter account of the Southern District of New York that he was not stepping down and that he in fact could not.
You can't fire me. I don't quit.
Yeah, which, by the way, I love about that is it's a graphic that has like his statement and his picture on it, which is just really nice to me. That like someone in the design shop, he was like, throw my photo in there too, just so they know who's saying he's not quitting. And then,
yeah, I said it.
Yeah, the Southern District of New York announced he was not quitting, would not be stepping down until a replacement was named because of really complicated stuff that we should, that boggles my mind to understand. Technically, he was not appointed by the president, so he could stay in that position. Important thing about Jeff Berman is that this is a Trump loyalist, more or less, or at least in his own political side. But if he was let go by the president suddenly, and then as we record, forced to fire, then the Southern District of New York is investigating Trump Organization stuff. They're investigating Rudy Giuliani and his only friends, a lot in that world. So one could assume he was getting close to something.
The big cases were the Southern District was the one that was the prosecuted former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen. That particular case, Berman had recused himself from, but he was investigating Rudy Giuliani and Igor and Frodo on the Ukraine stuff, as well as two different banks that had questionable things going on. Deutsche Bank, which has been funding the Trump Organization for many years, and a Turkish bank called I think it's called Halka Bank, which in John Bolton's new book says that the president of Turkey, Recep Erdogan, had asked Trump to intervene on. So there's a lot of stuff that comes that SDNY had on its plate, and yes, the Supreme Court, possibly as early as this week, may rule on different groups having access to Trump's tax returns, which, by the way, is also connected to Deutsche Bank. So all of these things were sort of coming to a head at the same time, and so yes, it definitely makes the firing of the U.S. attorney look very suspicious. And by the way, it's funny that it by making him this decision today, everybody can make their Saturday Night Massacre or Watergate jokes. So it's perfect for us in the journalism business.
Everyone, good work. Congrats, guys.
Finally, a good guy with an angle. It's so good.
Do you guys just have a whole bunch of, at the Daily News, just have a bunch of old tabloid covers from the Watergate era that you're just like pulling out, like just swap in, find, replace Nixon for Trump?
It makes it so much easier for us. Yeah, it's just like cut and paste. Okay, this one from 1974. Oh, there's a good 1975 one that works well here too. There we go. Oh.
So this comes on the heels of a week where the Supreme Court ruled twice with two pretty big blows against the Trump administration. Ruled, I think it was a 5-4 ruling on that his termination of the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was they ruled against it earlier in the week. 6-3 ruling protecting LGBTQ people from discrimination in the workplace. Surprisingly, conservative Neil Gorsuch wrote the opinion on that. Wrote the ruled with the majority on that, and actually, in fact, wrote the opinion. And then to cap it off, before this afternoon's firing or recommended firing of the guy who's investigating him, courts ruled to allow his former national security advisor John Bolton's book to be released to the public. I want to take a moment here to shout out my sister Caroline Brennan, formerly worked in the worlds of international affairs, who I was visiting her in Texas the day that John Bolton was hired, and I went, "Oh no, John Bolton has power again." And she said, "Ugh, knowing how Trump works, Bolton likes to be popular. He's going to get too popular. Trump will fire him. Then he'll write a book. That book will become a whole thing, and it'll be used against him." So, Caroline Brennan, you called every single part of this. Nice work.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Rough week for Law and Order for the president of Law and Order. Sudden surprise, unexpected wins for the rule of law, which we don't see as many of these days.
It was like these are things that like the conservative side are going to point to as activism. But if you read the actual decisions, it's like so on the DACA thing, it was like basically like, y'all didn't plan this very well. We can't approve this because this is just a poorly thought out, shoddy plan. And then when it came to the LGBT protections, like the way that Gorsuch lays it out, which is the same argument that like Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been making for sex discrimination for decades, which is basically that like, if you make something okay for men but not for women, that's sex discrimination. It can work either way. But what we tend to have as a problem with queerness, with homosexuality, with trans identity, is simply that people are deviating from our expectations of these binary gender norms. And so any problem we have with gayness is simply like, the way Gorsuch laid it out is like, if it's okay for a woman to be married to a man, but not a man to be married to a man, you're discriminating him on the basis of sex. So that's why it applies, even though sexual orientation and gender are totally different constructs. But what you're mad at is that he's not adhering to our social norms about what men are supposed to do. Men are supposed to be attracted to women. And so like both of these things are like extremely logical positions that a person should have to take. Yeah. So it's like, it's not that they were just like activism. It's like, y'all are dumb.
Yeah. And in fact, you're right. Like most of Gorsuch's entire opinion could be boiled down to like, well, if the thing we already ruled on is true, then this is true too. Why are you wasting my time? I'm trying to be evil over here. You're not letting me. Sorry, Robert, go ahead.
An interesting point about this is, and this is something that Justine, Amanda, and Timmery will find quite amusing. The Wall Street Journal on their editorial page, and they said what I'm about to say in a negative way.
Watch yourself, counselor. Sorry, go ahead.
Made it very clear that while Neil Gorsuch wrote the majority decision here, and the way this works is all the justices get together and then they decide how the case is going to fall out. Okay, 6 on this side, 3 on that side, and then the Chief Justice decides who amongst the majority will write the opinion. So Robert said, okay, Neil Gorsuch, you get to write the opinion, and it focuses on this approach called textualism. So, which comes down to, as Timmery was explaining it, if in terms of the reading of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, this ultimately becomes a question of sex. If you were making a determination saying that, okay, a woman can be attracted to a man, but because the man is attracted to the man, that man loses his job. No, in the literal definition of sex, this is what we're talking about here. Well, as the Wall Street Journal put it, this took the textualism argument, which had been generally speaking on the conservative side, and it was Elena Kagan on the court who had, over the last couple of years had basically been taking Gorsuch aside and making him realize how the textualism argument or the textualism approach can be used for progressive ends. So Kagan is sort of the is kind of the behind the scenes heroine from the progressive standpoint, even though it was Gorsuch who wrote it and in a sense sort of kind of created a somewhat conservative quote unquote framework to get to a progressive end.
Robert, on behalf of all the women of electoral dysfunction, we do appreciate that.
Was I mansplaining? Was I semi-mansplaining? I hope
I just, yeah, as a man who wasn't included in the people who should appreciate the point you made, I'd like to say that I also appreciated it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I think it was more like
again,
the man
using
elaborate.
textualism, I'm supposed to appreciate it, right? I think that's what I get out of it.
I feel, meanwhile, the strong implication from Robert is that I would oppose this, I guess.
Kagan!
Yeah.
Well, I also would like to point out, if we had a Supreme Court of all female identifying justices, there would be no behind the scenes women. But I am glad she did that.
I was trying to give one of the female justices her props while we were talking about Neil Gorsuch and John Roberts. So that was
very clear. Very clear.
Without a doubt.
Let's give her the props.
But also, like, I would say, you know, that's the weirdness of politics, right? Because it's actually to the advantage of everyone. I was listening to Slate Political Gabfest this week. They had one of the lawyers who prepared this brief on as a guest, and he was mentioning how how they had written the brief for Gorsuch, and they were hoping that Gorsuch would be the one to present it, because, you know, not only is the ruling in their favor, but if Gorsuch, a conservative justice who is respected by conservative justices on lower courts, is the one to write it, then they like that to help them in future arguments. Like, they can, you know, be like, look, and your guy over here, you're conservative, the person you put up on a pedestal says I'm right, come on. So I'm sure part of that with Kagan was also like, you should write it, but here's why you should write it, you know, like, and that's an important thing too.
Neil Gorsuch, you know, coming out as a homotextual was the big news of the week.
Boy.
Huge news of the week.
You did all that good work before, and then you just right at the end.
Go there. Well, behind every great man is a Kagan.
I'm just glad you didn't call him transtextual, because that is outdated.
Well, what's that? What was that? What did you say?
I'm just glad you didn't call him transtextual, because that would be offensive.
I was thinking of going with. I was going to go with bisexual, but I just didn't want to.
Now you're erasing them.
But yeah,
is
textuality binary though? I think we should really.
It's more of a
question.
It's a text scale.
I'm so confused at this point.
I will say one thing though, you know, the concern after Gorsuch's decision, there were many social conservatives that were suffering from agenda dysphoria. So it was.
Oh man.
I love
By the way, this entire conversation is.
I feel like right now, like, the thing that makes me happiest is how upset that Brett Kavanaugh probably is. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Downing those beers like nothing, man. I tell you.
I was going to say, you know, who I think is really upset is Susan Collins, because if I'm a Maine Democrat running against Susan Collins, I'm doing ads on how technically this week she voted to end DACA, and technically this week she voted to deny protections for LGBTQ workers in the workplace. And by the way, they are doing that by virtue of voting for Brett Kavanaugh. By the way, the entire conversation we just had just seems to me like this is how you pass the bar in California. It's just a bunch of puns about textualism. So let's talk very briefly about John Bolton, whose mustache and face are, you know, burned in historic memory, and there'll be a statue to that guy one day. That's the worst part. This book that he wrote has some pretty shocking stuff in it. I think the one that most got most coverage is that Trump basically begged China to interfere in the upcoming election and help him win, which is my favorite. It's the begging. Laugh.
Did that on live TV, so it was not exactly a big bombshell.
Well, that's true. And it's the kind of book, like, there's a lot in here. As we said, it's nothing new, but it's another person confirming it. And it's a person who is, is not like, this isn't a moderate Republican. This is a guy who's from a pretty conservative branch of the party. He's from, like, he is very much, he's from that sort of like the Bush wing to the more like arch neocon Dick Cheney, let's go start some wars wing. And, I think whatever anger I might have over the fact that he could have said all this under oath in an impeachment proceeding, this is pretty damning for the guy.
That's the only thing that I'm thinking of whenever people bring up John Bolton, is how there were passages from the book that were available to be read, and the idea was during the impeachment trials that these would have been damning, and Bolton went out of his way to say, I'm not saying a thing until this thing is over. So why anybody is giving this the time of day outside of a court of law, I really don't know why.
Even if it had been that, Daryl, even if it had been that clear, you might have said, okay, well, whatever. But he danced around this and had it 2 or 3 different ways from Sunday, when the House was, when House members were doing the initial impeachment inquiry. He let it be known through the lawyer he shared with his former deputy, Charles Kupperman, that Kupperman announced that he was going to fight a subpoena to testify in front of the House members, and Bolton let it be known that he would do the same thing. So the Democrats didn't even bother trying to subpoena him at the House. And then when it got to the Senate, he said, well, now that it's in the Senate, I will follow a subpoena. And of course, the Republicans had no intention of subpoenaing him at all. So I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. It would be kind of interesting rough justice if we're in a situation where the judge says, look, the cat's out of the bag. I'm not going to hold up on the release of this book, but Bolton may have run afoul of some classification issues, and at some point the federal government may try and come back and grab his and grab his advance. So that would be kind of the best of all possible worlds at this point.
That would be great. Yeah, if his book is allowed to be seen, but he makes no money on it, that would be just praying for him.
And the House Democrats most definitely should subpoena him anyway, because there is when you step back, there's a lot of solid information that needs broader expansion on. The China stuff we kind of sort of knew. We didn't know so much about the Turkey stuff, and there's just this is somebody who was respected by, as Tom said, was respected by many Republicans for his hawkish sensibilities. There's some kind of conflict there, but yeah, he had been a long time Republican, regular on Fox and so forth, and it's interesting. In the space of 2 or 3 weeks, 2 former members of Trump's foreign policy team, Jim Mattis on Secretary of Defense, and now John Bolton, both of them had very different views on how the defense structure should work, but both of them now really completely agree that Donald Trump is unfit to be president. So there you go.
Better late than never, am I right?
If only there's 40 million John Bolton and Mattis clones that can vote in the red states. That's my hope.
To me, this is like the way that Trump has consolidated power, and really his entire base with like most of the folks that, like, I'm from the Midwest originally, and the people that I'm still in contact with, for the most part, are not fans of him, but I still, am kind of aware of the sentiment there. They love this like strongman idea. They love this like dude who just says whatever, even if it's like, and especially if like we keep talking about, especially if it's hurtful and offensive to these people. I love that shit. He's popular because he is a bully. He's popular because he faces no consequences for any of his behavior ever. But the thing is like, again, to go back to that, the way you get people to make health choices, the way you get people to make behavioral changes, if it seems cool to do. If it's like people like me and people that I want to be like, do this thing. But the moment that this guy starts losing his cachet, and the moment that his like dudes around him start being like, yo, like, and when he stops being untouchable, when he stops being like Teflon, then he's gonna lose all this groundswell because they don't want to identify with this beta, right? So like the best possible thing that can happen for the sake of the country is that people realize this guy is not cool. This guy's not cool, not strong. He wouldn't win in a fight against anybody. He's stupid and he's bad. And like when they start to realize it's not cool to like this guy, that's when he's just gonna lose that whole cult.
That's the thing
You
I
should
think
get
about
that
a
on a
lot.
t-shirt.
That's, I think about that a lot. Like the things everyone in America tells me they hate about New York City, like, is Donald Trump. And that's fascinating to me that he's the most popular New Yorker in the parts of this country that hate New York City. Like, what do they hate? They hate, like people who never worked for a living, people who just inherited wealth, people who make it all about them, people who are afraid of doing, their own dirty work, like people with bad hair like that. It's like, just seems like that is the thing. Like they describe Donald Trump like egotistical maniacs. I'm like that, like, I hate that too. If you're honest, like if this election had been like Mike Bloomberg versus Donald Trump, I'd be like, I get why you guys hate New York City. Totally understand. Totally fair. Totally deserved. Get rid of us. I think we will leave it there for another dark week in the United States.
Hey, Tom, Daryl and I are right here. Come on.
Oh boy.
Right.
You know
Hey.
what? I apologize. You're right.
On an upswing, there have been like 23 straight days of protests.
Yeah.
Like,
Hey,
And
that's amazing.
and an
you know,
important
only one president could do that.
That's an important point to Robert made this point at the beginning of the show. We've seen consistent protests in New York City, but the protesters are wearing masks, and we have not seen an uptick in COVID-19 whatsoever. So like that is a good sign that the outdoor protests with, like again, the protesters, most of them wearing masks, like there's a way to ensure that we protect this right to protest safely in this era, hopefully. And it's so far so good.
And New York City enters phase 2 of reopening on Monday, which allows outdoors seating of restaurants and stuff like that. So good for us, New York.
And Timmy, Philadelphia, it's phase yellow, right? Are you guys go by a color spectrum in Philly, right?
Yeah. So we are full blown yellow right now. Which basically means that the sidewalks are full of people eating food, so we have to walk in the street around them.
Nice.
And we'll be going into green phase in like July 3rd or something, which I don't really know what it means. Basically, like,
That means
people could be inside.
yeah, it means indoor places can open. I'm in some random conversations about some of the theater and stage groups that I'm a part of that are like, we have the opportunity to open back up. So there's a lot of conversations like, well, how do we not kill our fans?
It'll be a long time till we can have enough people in a space that we can afford to put on shows, though. That's the thing.
Right.
Last weekend, last Sunday, as a matter of fact, I did something that I had not done in like 3 or 4 months, and I got on a Metro North train and went up to Fairfield, Connecticut, to visit an old high school friend of mine. Connecticut allowed outdoors restaurant seating in phase 1, and my God, it was like you don't realize how much you miss some of the simple things, but just being able to like sit outside with a friend at a outside, and all the workers there, they were taking orders and stuff, all had masks on and had gloves on and so forth. But yeah, it was just like a kind of a glorious, it was kind of a glorious moment, and fingers crossed, prayers and so forth that New York manages to do it as successfully.
Yeah, I'm very excited to eat in the streets in cities like New York and Philadelphia, famously known for safe drivers. With that, we're going to call it a day. Normally at this point, I put it to the panel to give some suggestions of things for folks to do while cooped up inside. But this week, as it our 15th show, I just want to really make a quick message of we started doing this show 15 weeks ago, or 14 weeks ago. We're at 15 because we did a bonus episode. Mainly because I felt bad that I was, just boring my lovely wife Amanda with all of my opinions on politics. I was like, let's get together, a group of friends. And it came about entirely that, and all the people on this call and all the people we've had on the show are people I love talking to and love seeing. And this was, as much a creative endeavor as it is just an excuse to see all of your faces and talk to you and let you know we're all still alive and that one day there will be the other side of this. And I want to thank everyone for being with us today. Thank you to everyone who listened to the show. And even as we start to reopen and go outside, we're going to keep doing these because why not, right? That's a ringing endorsement. Why not? But with that, I want to say thank you to our panel. Thank you very much, Dr. Timmerie Schmidt, for being with us. Thank you very much, Justine Davey, for being here. Thank you very much, Daryl Charles, for being with us. Thank you very much, Amanda Nicastro. And thank you, as always, to my partner in crime, my buddy, my pal, my lifelong chum, Robert George. And another quick thank you to Kevin Scott for the show animation, to Joanne Harris for the show theme music, to Declan Shalvey and Jordy Belair for designing the show Eagle, and to my buddy, my pal, my lifelong chum, Mr. Ned Thorne, for directing these and putting them together every single week. We will be back next week. And now, to play us out with a special musical performance, finally you can see the face of the man behind the Star Wipes. Throwing it to Los Angeles, California, where Ned Thorne will play us out this week. Ned Thorne, Star Wipe to yourself.
Thanks, Tom. I'm sitting here in my home office / editing room, having had virtually nothing to do for the last 3-4 months except to collect unemployment checks and grow my beard, which might be an attempt to look more like the soulful troubadour singer-songwriter that I'm about to do for you now. I wrote this song today. It's called Times Like These. Not sure it's very good, but hope you like it. Told me once, I don't remember when, you told me that we should be more than friends. You told me that I'd hold your hand. You asked me if I'd take a stand. I love the way the sun lights your hair. I love the deep dark colors there. From the very first moment to the moment now, we made it work somehow. That we will become when the leaves have fallen and the rivers run. I don't know what stories will be told when we are dead or really old. Tired of seeing everything unfold. What is bought and what is sold. If the world be warm or cold, it will take the place of gold. Still be minds to mold, who will still be left to scold. Oh, it's a crazy world, but I got you. I love the things that we're gonna do. I love the people that we will become when the leaves have fallen and the rivers run. All the voters have been polled. Who will cower, who will be bold? When the dice have all been rolled, what cards will we have left to hold? What are we gonna tell our kids someday? How we pissed everything away. When they look at us, what are we gonna say?